Alright guys, welcome back to F1 News. The Las Vegas Grand Prix is here. The opening ceremony has been and gone, and many of the drivers deeply frustrated with the way that Formula 1 seems to be trending. Max Verstappen especially making his thoughts very clear on the matter, not happy with the track, not happy with the opening ceremony, saying that he felt like the clown at the circus. Is he right? Are the other drivers correct to say that Liberty Media needs to make some changes? Or does it really matter what the drivers think at the end of the day? Very much intrigued to your perspective in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new. As always, I would greatly appreciate it. Couple of additional liveries for this weekend. We saw yesterday 5 special liveries. We have 2 more, one of which from Alfa Romeo. You guys can see what it is. They've got the cards. It's a Las Vegas livery. You guys know how it is. And also Alpha Tauri. I actually kind of like what they've got going on here. Just kind of special. So not many teams. Well, there's more teams arriving with special liveries than arriving without them. But yesterday was the opening ceremony, and look, I'm going to share many examples of why the drivers get frustrated about this type of stuff. Some drivers kind of like it, or at least they will tolerate it and say, you know what, sure, it's part of the show. We're here for entertainment at the end of the day, and if this helps grow the sport, then let's go for it. Charles Leclerc is one of those drivers. He is, though, among, a very small minority of drivers that think this way. As Chris Medland says, when a driver arrived in the paddock, this sign changes to welcome them alongside a number of Elvis impersonators and the Blue Man Group. So this is one side. I mean, like, look at this image here. If I got a full screen version, I guess this is the best you're going to be able to get. But, yeah, so we've got all these, like, Elvis impersonators. Here's Charles Leclerc, the Blue Men, and whatever. It's just like, you know, do we need it? Maybe not. Here's another shot of Carlos Sainz with, more such, clownery, I suppose, is what Max Verstappen would describe this as, and we'll see maybe more so as to why in a second. So this was the opening ceremony. The drivers weren't a massive part of this. It was all, the glitz and the glamour and the razzmatazz of the whole thing. They have a load of performing artists, sure. It's a big ceremony. They're welcoming the Grand Prix to town, and they want to get the drivers involved to some degree. This, we can see what was going on here. And, according to people that attended, I'm sure it was a good concert, right? Fine. But the drivers, they want to be in bed, or they want to be prepping for the weekend. They're there to race, and that's their intention. But that's not really how it is. In these weekends nowadays, especially for the drivers, get pretty stacked with commitments, especially when they've got to turn up to stuff like this and do all the media commitments that are associated with such an event. They're not particularly happy about it, and maybe that's fine, The drivers are always going to try and do less media commitments if they can. They are there to race and to win at the end of the day. But I can definitely sympathise with them on this one. So we then got what looked like a Hunger Games start. This is what people thought about, right? It's like almost presenting the tributes as it was in the Hunger Games when they bring all the drivers up on these platforms. So basically each set of drivers was up on one of these platforms here. They got raised up. I think like Haas and the Aston guys were kind of on the same one. And well, here's a couple of shots of that. So we've got the Mercedes boys. They, George is trying to smell for the cameras. Look, they have to get up there and for 30 seconds, they have to wave and say hello to the crowd and this type of stuff. And I get why, of all the things that the drivers get frustrated with, this is kind of one of the most frustrating because they're not doing anything other than just like smiling and waving. They're not like, even on the parade laps they do before the Grand Prix, at least they're kind of going around the track. They're at least in a car. Okay, they might not be driving the car, but, there's a bit more to it. Here, they're just being presented as, like, items, really, to look at and be appreciated. Like, Hamilton doesn't look especially... Okay, he's going to wave to the crowd. You know what Hamilton... he loves the crowd, all this stuff. Like, obviously, he says it after every time he gets a podium in a Grand Prix. But, he doesn't look overwhelmingly... like absolutely mega happy about this, and I think maybe you can tell by Carlos Sainz's face that he's like, this is what we're doing. Now Charles Leclerc, he doesn't mind this stuff, right? He's more in favour of the show and stuff like this, and we're going to see more of this, right? This was just the opening ceremony. This is only the beginning of what we're going to see for the rest of the weekend. We know that on Miami, wasn't it, on that Sunday, when they had the drivers come out and, do that opening ceremony thing they did there. I'm guessing we're not done with the drivers getting presented, as it were, for the driver entrances come Sunday on the race day, and they're apparently going to use the sphere for this, actually, as we can see here what that might potentially look like to introduce the drivers, which is very near turn 7 and 8. Just on the topic of the sphere, it's actually been confirmed. This is probably quite sensible, really. As you're going through turn 7 and turn 8, the sphere is like right there in front of you. And I would not be surprised if, to be honest, drivers this weekend start to say they're getting distracted by the sphere in the braking zones. I think it's definitely plausible that that could be the case. The way the section works around there, it might not be so much, but I can see that it could be distracting, especially that like yellow face with the eyes that like follows things around. That especially could be quite distracting. But during the Grand Prix, that's not going to be on because they won't be using any yellow. So any blue, because of course blue flags are a flag that can be waved, red or yellow, the three, I guess, most common flags to be waved during the Grand Prix, none of those colours will be on the sphere during the race. So it still could be bright green or bright purple or whatever, and I guess they have to make sure they're not using colours too similar to any of these. I don't know. Probably a wise decision, but at the end of the day, it can only potentially cause more chaos. So Hamilton goes on to say this about it and says, look, we can't be a circus, and sure, the Formula One is kind of a travelling circus anyway, but especially the drivers think it's a bit of a circus this weekend. We can't be a circus that shows up that's all glitz and glamour and local people are affected negatively by it. He went on to say that there should be a way that some of the money they make from this or some of the revenues should be diverted back to supporting the local community, trying to offset some of the frustrations, because, there's many interviews that have been done with locals about exactly why it isn't exactly great, and there's maybe good reason, and then other people are saying, well, actually, there's other reasons why that's the case, not necessarily just Formula One. I think they've spent like, what, $80 million, is it, to repave some of the elements here that are going to be driven on this weekend, which might be interesting with brand new asphalt for the Grand Prix, not rubbered in at all, especially if it rains before the Grand Prix or something and washes away all that rubber that could go down on the track over the next couple of days. Maybe exciting for racing, could cause some chaos. And sure, that could be good for the local community because for 3 days a year, they use that new strip of asphalt. For the rest of the year, the locals get to benefit from that repaving, I suppose. But there's obviously negative consequences as well for those that do live locally, and Hamilton wants to see that type of stuff addressed. Now, Verstappen, as you might expect, of all the drivers to be critical of this whole show, Verstappen is right at the top of the list. He was asked the question about what he thinks about the track and says it's not very interesting, and that might benefit some teams, that might not favour other teams. I think that's generally true. There's a very high percentage of this track that's going to be at full throttle. It's not massively technical. There's a few interesting corners, but outside of that, there isn't really that much going on, to be honest. I think Verstappen's probably right. And sure, it might well have been designs with overtaking in mind because people correlate overtaking to good racing. There's some correlation, but not massively so, and drivers like George Russell have said that he's not sure that this track is really going to deliver the race that they're hoping for, and Verstappen even went on to say that it's a 99% for show this weekend, and it's 1% a sporting event. And I think he's probably near enough on the money, really. Like, when you look at the Las Vegas Grand Prix and all of the discussion around it, a lot of the discussion is not about the motor race on the Saturday night, as it will be local time, and, Sunday morning, for example, over here in the UK. It's largely about the show and what it means for Formula One and the drivers being, Hollywood actors, like at least they try and make out that they are in that way. Verstappen doesn't necessarily agree, and even went on to say, probably in his most damning statement of all, we are just standing up there looking like a cloud. So, he comes up, he has to wave to the crowd, and he can see, unlike Max and Checo look especially pleased that they're up there being paraded around to the fans when, they want to be respected for their driving talent and abilities rather than what they do on the rest of the weekend, especially getting, chucked up there like a circus animal in a way, or as he describes it, the cloud at the circus. So is Verstappen wrong? I don't think so. I do, always wonder though, like how much the drivers should really have a say in this, because they're always going to say, we just want to focus as a team. Ideally, I'm sure many drivers, if they could do zero media commitments, they would. And, sure, it's good for the sport that they have to do something. Now, whether they should have to do all of this stuff, that's another question entirely. But at the end of the day, it's not the drivers that are going to make these decisions. It's what's best for the bottom line. And Formula One management will look at the sprint races. They'll see the fact that, kind of more people probably are tuning in over the course of a weekend than without them. So we're going to keep them around. And it's a similar thing with this. Whether this really works in the long run, whether the American audience really care, that's another thing as well. Like how many people really look at these opening ceremonies or the driver entrances and think, oh yeah, fantastic. Like, let's go boys. This is what Formula One should be. and how many people think, this is a bit too much and we're making it a bit too much of a circus, as Verstappen thinks. So Norris agrees, and you'll find most drivers agree, it's more of a show than it was a few years ago. To be honest, I just want to come here and drive. It's difficult enough already for the drivers because they're struggling with the time zone stuff. It's actually really strange. Not exactly the time zones, but like Hamilton said yesterday, he was in bed at 5 a.m. because he needs to adjust his sleep schedule to get up at like midday 1 p.m. to then prepare for racing at night time, like very late. I mean, the race is at 10 p.m. on the Saturday night. So in order to make that a normal schedule, they have to go to bed really late, get up early, and it's a strange one for the drivers. So in addition to that, having way more responsibilities on top, this is one thing that Sainz said here in a second, and Hamilton agrees with Verstappen as well. Like, it's not just Verstappen saying this. He's been the most, vociferous in his criticism. It takes energy to go and do those things. I just want to get in the car. I don't really care about all the other stuff that's around it. I just want to drive. So this opinion will be echoed basically everywhere, and Sainz says that these type of weekends are very much packed schedules. They're very repetitive for the drivers. So many commitments they have that they need to rethink how these weekends are going. Some drivers also agree. I mean, Stroll says F1 drivers are not trying to be Hollywood stars. We're here to race. And sure, Charles Leclerc is on the other side and says, look, it's a beautiful sport, but you also need to attract new people to this beautiful sport. And if this helps Liberty Media try and achieve that, then sure, I imagine it's not going away. And we've got to remember, Las Vegas is, I don't know how many years their deal is, but it's like 10 years, isn't it? Something like that. So we are going to have to get used to F1 racing in Las Vegas. Now, whether F1 needs Vegas more than Vegas needs F1, that's another debate that our locals are certainly having at the moment. And whether they will adjust the track layout in coming years or make changes to the way this race is done based on what the driver feedback is and how the race goes come Sunday, that's another question. But yeah, 90% of drivers are, I guess, on Verstappen's side, but they might not quite say it in the way that Verstappen would say it. And there's been some controversy around this, like, as Yardo says here, another terrible tweet here from Alex Gillen. And sure, I don't agree with what Alex is saying, but I thought it was interesting that he raised the point that, should the F1 world champion be talking in this way about Formula One? I don't have an issue with it personally. I mean, look, Hamilton and Vettel and others criticised the sport in certain ways when they weren't happy with how things were going when they were champions. I don't think there's any issue with Verstappen doing it, but look, does it look bad on the sport when your world champion, the dominant driver, actually doesn't care about any of the things you guys are doing and actually completely disagrees with many of the directions that Formula One is taking? I think Verstappen shouldn't be forced to lie, he shouldn't be forced to, oh yeah, fantastic, I just love what Liberty Media are doing here, even though sometimes he will say comments like that sarcastically. Like in previous weekends, he's been asked about sprint racing, he says, oh yeah, I love them, love sprint races, my favourite type of thing to do ever. So everybody knows what his true meanings there and intentions are, but this is the thing for Liberty Media, that it doesn't really look good on the sport when your world champion and dominant driver is saying all the things that he's saying about the way that you are running the sport. And, I don't think Verstappen should change. I don't think they should be censoring his point of view. I think maybe there's an argument that Liberty Media needs to think a little bit more closely about the way they develop their sport going forwards. Now, Will Buxton, of course, says, really enjoyed this. It was fantastic. The ones who got the biggest cheers were the ones who embraced it for the 30 seconds that they were asked to smile and wave. So his opinion clearly is, who cares? The drivers are only there for 30 seconds up on this little platform. They can deal with that and they get paid all this money to do so. And maybe that's fair enough and justified. But the more of this type of stuff that happens, the more frustrating it's going to get for probably everybody involved. Now, before we close out the video, did want to mention what we actually might see this weekend. Who's going to win? Okay, Verstappen, but, who might be competitive? Which team is going to be behind Max? Is it going to be McLaren, Mercedes, Ferrari? Could Aston Martin have another decent weekend? We see a low downforce rear wing. Mercedes straight line speed, of course, is bad, but when they commit to low downforce, it's actually not so bad. It's like weekends, like the most recent weekends, when they try and max out the downforce to protect their tyres because they get the setup wrong and the tyres are killing themselves, and then they still can't protect the tyres, and they're just losing so much straight line speed. That's on a bad weekend. When they're at circuits like Monza or whatever, they won't be quick in a straight line, but they won't be, all that bad relative to their competition, but it's still not going to be great. So low downforce rear wing, we'll see what the teams go for, whether they go for like a Baku setup, whether they go for a Monza setup or a Spa setup, but it's going to be something like that. I do wonder what it means for the slipstream and overtaking, because you guys know that when DRS is on, when there's lower downforce, there's less advantage. It's circuits like Monza, It's actually quite hard to overtake even with DRS, just because you don't get that much benefit from DRS when the wings are super trimmed out. Las Vegas could be similar, but as we've said before, lower track temperatures means lower air temperature, which means slightly thicker air, denser air, and therefore better slipstream effect. So I definitely think overtaking will be doable, and both DRS zones are very generous, shall we say, to say the least. And I don't think that if Verstappen, let's say Verstappen does qualify further back or have some instant in the early part of the race due to lacking tyre temperatures, I don't think he's going to have any difficulty making passes on that long back DRS straight. Hamilton does say, though, that because the track is not particularly technical, as he described it, kind of like how Verstappen said it's kind of a boring track, it might suit Mercedes better because they have less problems to overcome when the track is more simple. Then again, it massively depends what happens, I guess, in a few hours' time, really, when practice begins, and what the track is actually like, because the teams can simulate it, but they don't really know what the asphalt, what the track conditions are going to be like until they get there, how much grip is there going to be, and that is going to inform their decisions on the weekends. Sainz, though, and I've got to say, Ferrari should be pretty good here. Like, if you compare it to Monza, or especially maybe even to Singapore, they, were good at both of those tracks relatively at the very least. Tight corners, 90-degree corners, and then long straights. That has been suiting Ferrari quite well. Ferrari tend to struggle more when there's more medium speed corners. They're quite good in the high speed, at least high speed long straights, and they're pretty good at the low speed corners. Traction's pretty decent. In the middle ground, that's where they struggle more, but circuits that don't really have any middle grounds, slow corners like Singapore, or just long straights and also kind of slow corners such as Monza, they're at the best they ever really tend to be. So as Sainz says, I hope that it's going to be better. It should be more suited to us. Long straights like in Monza, tight corners like in Monza or Singapore. Maybe turn 1, turn 2 we won't be great, but apart from that, it should suit us better than in recent events. Hopefully it will give a better opportunity maybe for a podium. So we'll see if Red Bull make any mistakes this weekend, as they did back in Singapore, of course. But it's got to be said that after, for the past 5 winners of new tracks on the calendar in the 2020s, Hamilton and Verstappen are the only winners of those new tracks. Hamilton, of course, at Mugello, Portimao in 2020, Losail, which of course is Qatar in 2021, and Jeddah, and then last year Miami was a brand new circuit that Verstappen won, and you wouldn't necessarily bet against that similar story repeating itself again. But very much enjoyed to your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.